Welcome to Clear the Air with me, Angela Lim, medical doctor and co-founder of ClearHead, an innovative employee wellbeing platform. Clear the Air is a podcast covering those experiences in your life or questions you have that you feel too vulnerable to share with those around you, such as, why do I feel so lonely? And what can I do to feel happier? We get real and raw on these existential questions on mental health and well-being that's puzzled humans for millennia, sharing the science behind what you're experiencing and the answers behind those questions. Menopause is a significant life transition that 50% of the population goes through, but often not very much talked about, especially in the workplace. Aside from physical symptoms, menopause can also have a big impact on your mental health. You may find yourself dealing emotionally with mood swings or reflections on aging, your purpose, your self-image, and many more. In today's webinar, we are joined by the Menodoctor, Dr. Linda Deer, to learn how to create a space where menopause is not only understood, but also catered for. So Linda is a specialist GP and menopause doctor trained in the UK and based in New Zealand. She currently runs a private menopause clinic called Menodoctor and sees women from all over the country. She has also created New Zealand's largest survey on menopause and runs menopause training and education services for workplaces. But most interestingly, Linda has done a very circuitous route and also been trained as a psychologist at the NHS. And with all of that, please welcome Linda.
Hello, everybody. Lovely to be here.
Well, Linda, I loved your background. So maybe we could start there. Can you share with us a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, so I took a scenic route, which I think is not always such a bad thing. But yeah, it took me a while to realise that I wanted to go to med school and be a doctor. And what I originally wanted to do was psychology. So that was my first degree. And worked in psychology after that, more in research than clinical psychology, but was just really fascinated with how our minds work and mental health in general. But I was also quite interested in bodies as well. So I went away from psychology and became a fitness trainer for a while because I was quite into fitness as well, the sort of physical health side of things. And then I decided I wanted to put everything together and actually become a doctor. So in my late 20s, I got into med school in London. They do let older people in sometimes. The oldest person on that course with me, she started med school at 48, which I think is incredible. There's a lot of things you can do in your 40s, basically, and your 50s. So I eventually got myself to med school and became a doctor at 32. And then after working in hospitals and then becoming a GP, I have now decided that what I really want to do is perimenopause and menopause care and just make that my focus.
Well, maybe to start us off then, so what is menopause? What is perimenopausal care? All of those terms that you've just shared with us, maybe you could give us a little bit more of the details behind it.
Yeah, because we need to know what we're talking about, don't we? And people hear the word menopause and usually think of a certain number of things, and that's hot flushes, period stopping, and irritability, grumpiness. They're the kind of image that people get when they hear the word menopause. And we often also assume it's something that's going to impact us in our older years. It's kind of an older thing sort of that we think about. And that's a very limited view of what menopause really is. The word itself is quite a limited word as well, because when you translate the word, it just means your final ever period. So meno comes from the Greek word meaning monthly, and pause means to stop. So menopause is just a woman's last ever period. We don't have those things forever. We define it after she's had a whole year without them, though, because what can happen is they can spread out and women can start having periods less frequently. So to be sure it's her last one, her menopause moment, we have to wait a year. So we say after a year of no periods, we can call the woman postmenopausal. She's on the other side of menopause. And menopause, as well as the period stopping, what it really means is that your ovaries have stopped. So that means fertility has stopped. So the ovaries don't work forever. They eventually stop making eggs. They stop making hormones. And that means periods stop happening. Now, before your periods stop, they kind of stagger to the finishing line, and they don't tend to stop abruptly in most women. And that's what perimenopause is. It's the winding down phase of our ovaries. Puberty is when they're getting going. Perimenopause is when they're slowing down. And that's the phase that can be the real sneaky part, that is even less well understood than menopause itself. But we often use the word menopause to just encompass the whole thing, the perimenopause, the menopause moment, and the postmenopause, just to use one word to keep it simpler. But they do have slightly different meanings, those words.
And, is there a common age bracket where menopause would start? And you talked about the perimenopausal stage. How long does that normally last before we kind of get to this menopause officially, no further period stage?
There are some general ages. So the average age for the final period, which is what menopause is about 51. But you can have your final period any age between 45 and 55, and we consider that a normal kind of age for periods to stop. Some women do have their periods stop earlier than that, though. And if it's a lot earlier than that, if it happens before 40, if your last period happens before 40, that's something a bit different. We call that premature ovarian insufficiency, because that is quite early for women's bodies to be without those hormones. But for most women, they're going to be in the sort of average range. Somewhere between 45 and 55 is when their periods stop. But perimenopause, the sneaky bit before then, is really more difficult to pin down, and is really variable in terms of the age it starts and how long it lasts, and also how bad or good it is. Everybody is very, very different in terms of what their perimenopause and menopause looks like. But really, perimenopause, so when the ovaries start to kind of get a bit tired, that is sort of mid to late 30s, early 40s. It's that sort of time, which a lot of people think is too young for anything with the word menopause in it, including a lot of doctors. But when we think about fertility in women, and that is, when do our ovaries and their egg supply start to change, we know that's about 35 onwards. From mid-30s onwards, a woman's fertility does start to decline more steeply, which is why if you have a baby after the age of 35, like I did, you're called a geriatric mother, which is quite rude. But that's why. So we agree that from an egg point of view, ovaries are starting to struggle from that age. So it's not that surprising that from a hormone production point of view, they're also probably starting to struggle, which is what perimenopause is. It's when they fluctuate and our hormone levels are up, down, and sideways, and all a bit curly for a while. So age-wise, that's your general sort of range that you're looking at, but it varies hugely between women.
And how do you actually know if you have menopause? And basically, if they're around the age bracket that you're talking about and, they're on, for example, an IUD, then how would they know that they've actually entered menopause because they're not actually normally receiving their period anyway?
Exactly. So defining menopause purely on the basis of periods is not great for women who are on contraception that's stopping them or changing them. And it's also not good for women who've had a hysterectomy at some point because they don't have periods at all anymore. So in women in those groups, either on a contraception that's artificially changing or stopping their periods, or they've got no womb there anymore to tell us what's going on, it can be trickier to know what are their ovaries up to, because we kind of use the womb to tell us what the ovaries are up to. But if the womb's not there or the periods are being suppressed, how do we do it? We kind of do it mainly based on listening to the woman. What sort of symptoms has she started to have? Does it fit with hormonal changes? But there is a blood test that can sort of tell us if a woman's hit menopause, but it's not perfect. Sometimes we do use that, especially for women who have a Mirena coil in, because a lot of women get to their late 40s or early 50s, they've still got a coil in, it's stopping their periods, but they want to know, well, can I just take this bloody thing out now? You know, am I going to have more periods? Am I still able to get pregnant? And there are a couple of blood tests we do, usually 2 of them we do, to be more sure that their ovaries have actually retired in the background, and therefore she can stop that form of contraception if she wants to, and she's not going to have periods come back. But it's sometimes tricky when you lose the clue of periods. It does make defining your menopause moment a bit more tricky.
You know, you talked about here are some like typical symptoms of menopause, in addition to, you know, losing your period. In the context, obviously, in the context of mental health, what are more mental health related symptoms that you could share with us?
Yeah, and this is a side of menopause that we really need to make more noise about, if you like, because it can be more of a psychological experience for a lot of women. You know, everyone's waiting for that first hot flush or for periods to stop or change. And sometimes your thermostat's fine, your womb is fine, your periods are fine. It's something else that changes because of these hormone levels fluctuating. And for a lot of women, that is mood-related changes. And they can take any kind of shape or form, really, but the common ones that you see are anxiety. That's definitely a really common one, that women start to experience anxiety, or just a kind of edginess where there is just this kind of constant feeling of being on edge. So anxiety is definitely a thing. Low mood can be a thing as well, ranging from mild low mood to really severe low moods, really dark moods, and even suicidal thoughts. So you can get this whole spectrum, and you can also get the more sort of irritable, angry sort of moods as well coming into it, you know, a bit like the PMS that women often have tasted at some point, but kind of really increased. And that can be an early sign of perimenopause, actually, that a woman's PMS just suddenly starts to get a lot worse. So her periods may still be regular, but she is sort of saying the PMS is more intense than it used to be. The other mood changes that you see a lot of is this kind of loss of interest in things. I call it can't be botheredness. Almost, you just, even fun stuff, you know, you just sort of, and a lot of women say it's like I've lost the joy, just, you know, stuff that used to talk to me, used to make me feel good, used to whoosh nice chemicals through my brain and make me feel all fuzzy, just it doesn't happen like that anymore. And often sexuality, it's similar there as well, that sort of drive, sex drive, libido, that ultimate pleasure, that seems to go as well. So this is kind of how it can look, and it can be so different for different women. So it can cross over with, you know, clinical depression, clinical anxiety. It can look very similar, and it can be difficult to try and tease apart, well, what's hormonal, what's not. But there's definitely a powerful role for hormones on our mood, in our brains. We have receptors for these hormones all through our brains. So they are up there talking to our mind. And we need to acknowledge, you know, the role that hormones can play in mental health.
And I guess the thing that's, you know, really hard to understand, therefore, let's just say you're having some of these more psychological impact. How do you know if it's menopausal related, or whether it's other more traditional or more stereotypical type of mental health? Do you treat the mental health symptoms? Do you treat the hormones? You know, how would you kind of approach what's the best way to manage this for an individuals that is experiencing all of it?
Yeah, and it's messy, isn't it? It is complicated. We can't just blame hormones for everything. But we can't ignore them either, and it's hard to know how much is this, how much is that, because women have all kinds of other stress going on when they get to this part of their life. You know, midlife is busy. There's a lot of, you're being pulled and pushed in all directions, and it's hard work, this phase of life. regardless of what our hormones are up to on top of it. It's difficult to be certain sometimes of what we're looking at. Is it perimenopausal mood changes or menopausal mood changes, or is it clinical depression? Because that can rear its head as well. Especially if you've had depression in the past, we know there's a risk around perimenopause and menopause that things could turn again. So we need to kind of, be prepared for that possibility. The other clues that it might be hormonal, if she's had a history of hormonal mood problems, so if she's had postnatal depression, or if she's had very severe PMS or what's called PMDD, that's premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is, a much more significant, severe form of PMS. Women who've had that are also at risk potentially of having some significant mood changes at perimenopause, because they're obviously vulnerable around these hormonal shift times in their life. We think some women are just more sensitive to the huge shifts in hormones that happen after a baby, before a period, and around perimenopause. So there's some clues that you ask her about, previous history of issues like that around hormone changes. And also if a woman is actually having some period changes and the mood symptoms are coming all at the same time, that makes you think this could be perimenopause related. But as I said, sometimes the way women describe things is different. So they say, I'm not depressed, but I don't feel like myself anymore. That's another sentence I hear a lot. And I've lost the joy, I've lost the motivation. So these sorts of ways women describe their mood is slightly different. There's a wonderful woman in Australia called Professor Kulkarni, who is a psychiatrist who's done loads of work in this area, and she came up with a questionnaire called Menodoctor to try and decipher between, hormonal mood symptoms versus non-hormonal symptoms. So that's sometimes a tool that practitioners use, but really it is very difficult to be certain, is it hormonal, is it not? But we should be acknowledging hormones, and for some of these women we should be offering as an option hormonal-based treatments to see if they make a difference for her. Because to be honest, if you start some hormonal treatment and her mood symptoms improve dramatically, then that's giving you a very clear indication that hormones were part of the problem and they can be part of the solution.
I guess it's a good transition to kind of understand what is hormonal replacement therapy. Is it for everyone? When should you start it? What will it achieve? Maybe a bit of a background on that would be super helpful.
Yeah, so hormone replacement therapy is, in a simple sense, it's almost trying to recreate ovaries, because they're getting to the part of their life cycle where they're struggling in perimenopause and then retiring completely at menopause. When a woman has been through menopause and she's postmenopause, all of her hormone levels from their ovaries are low. And our ovaries make 3 hormones, which is another thing we often don't appreciate. We make estrogen, we make progesterone, and we make testosterone. And all 3 of these can have effects in our brain and on our mood, through various mechanisms. So post-menopause, it really is kind of replacement therapy, and that's where the HRT comes from. Although now we're supposed to call it menopausal hormone therapy, MHT, but most people still call it HRT. And so post-menopause, it is about just putting those hormones back in a stable level. In perimenopause, because you can take HRT in perimenopause as well, it's more like hormone stabilization therapy, because your ovaries are still doing their thing in the background, but it's got a bit erratic, and it's those ups and downs that can throw women around. So the purpose then is to try and stabilize, to give this nice stable level of hormones. And estrogen is the main hormone that we use in HRT, because that is the one that is often causing most of the problems, because the estrogen is either fluctuating or too low. And we can replace that hormone in a way now that really imitates what nature does, which is what body identical hormones are all about. So the products we try and use these days have the hormone in them has exactly the same molecular structure as the hormone we make naturally. So it's a perfect replica. So we can do that with estrogen. We can also do it with progesterone, and we can do it with testosterone. it gets complicated. Different women will need different ways of taking HRT and types of HRT. And one of the biggest differences is with the progesterone side of it. Not every woman has to take progesterone. Some women really do. If they want to take estrogen, they always have to have progesterone alongside that estrogen. And I'm talking about women who haven't had a hysterectomy, because your womb cells can get overstimulated if all you give them is estrogen. So you must have progesterone there. Women who've had hysterectomy can choose to just take estrogen if they want to. They don't necessarily have to take progesterone. But some women find progesterone can have benefits for them, including psychological ones. So body identical progesterone, because it acts on GABA receptors, that's how we think it has its effects, that can be calming for some women and can help with sleep for some women. But other women have the opposite effect. So there's also a phenomenon called progesterone intolerance, another thing we don't recognize enough. And for those women, progesterone makes them feel completely the opposite. It can almost cause PMS type symptoms, including mood ones. So there's all this variability, but HRT is something that we often don't offer readily enough to a lot of women. And we need to see that it has a role in helping psychological symptoms, not just hot flushes. There's lots of data coming out now to show that, yes, it can help with mood changes. And you hear that from women all the time, that it helps with the irritability, helps with the anxiety, helps with the mood, helps with the motivation. So it's certainly something we should all know about.
And so I guess what would be good to understand is how long should you be on these treatments? So for example, once we've gone through the perimenopausal phase and you're officially in menopause, do I then have all the symptoms go away and so therefore I don't need any further treatment? Is this something I have to do for life because the hormones have changed? Be good to get an understanding of, is it that we just need to adjust to a new normal, or is this something that we have to keep managing for the rest of our lives?
Again, it's different for different women. Most women do not take HRT forever. Most women, it is basically like a way to carry you through the roughest bit, if it's rough for you. For a lot of women, it's not rough at all. A lot of women wonder why we're talking about perimenopause and menopause so much, because they say, well, it was no big deal for me. My period stopped, that was it. So we've got to acknowledge that for some women it's no big deal. But if it is a big deal, there can be a period of time when it can be really quite rough. And I kind of liken it to being on a journey, with post-menopause being the island we're all heading to, and we're in a boat, and sometimes we can have a really choppy, unpleasant journey to get to that place. But the actual distance we're traveling, the trajectory we're on that nature has got in store for us, won't change whether we take HRT or not. We're not prolonging it or changing our menopause moment. We just are making the waters less choppy while we get there. And most women come through the roughest part. Nature marches on in the background. She knows how old we really are. And there's still this adaptation. So most women's symptoms do get better with time. The flushes, the mood changes, the sleep problems, the body aches. So somehow our receptors or whatever is going on accepts the fact that ovaries have retired and those hormones are not there anymore. And we do come through it. So most women don't take HRT forever. They eventually either reduce their dose for a bit or just, stop and everything's okay. You don't know when that moment is, unfortunately. Your body doesn't put a sign up and say, right, I'm done now. We've arrived. You can stop that estrogen patch. So there's a bit of figuring that out. It's quite fluffy. There's no test we can do to say, oh, you're fine now. So women just do it through how they feel. And ultimately, most women stop HRT and their symptoms have improved. The one set of symptoms that nature does not stop giving us is vaginal ones. So vaginal changes, like vaginal dryness, and that's a particular symptom that make a lot of people uncomfortable and we don't talk about enough. But it can be really significant and so easy to treat, because you can use topical hormones for that, which is not the same thing as HRT. And there's loads of data to show that topical estrogen in a cream or pessary is safe for women to use forever, because that's one bit of our body that does not get over menopause on its own. So that's something that I think women should know about, and doctors should be letting them know about a bit more, that we can help vaginas forever, because that's one symptom that nature doesn't seem to ever quite figure out what to do without ovaries. But everything else does settle, and HRT is a way to just make your journey there potentially less unpleasant, because a lot of women have such a bad time. They make all kinds of decisions that maybe they wouldn't have made if that journey had been easier, and that can be decisions at work or in their careers or in their relationships. So it can put women off on a tangent that they may never have gone on, which is what is really sad stories to hear.
And most people would, as you said, not be on HRT, and the symptoms may not be really bad, but it is obviously uncomfortable for some people as they transition through this phase. Are there other non-pharmaceutical solutions that we could look at? Are there dietary changes people could make? How would they, what about the sleep impact? All those kind of things. Are there lifestyle changes that can be done to manage the psychological and physical symptoms that you've described?
Totally. And one of the phrases I say a lot is, HRT doesn't stand for healthy lifestyle replacement therapy. It is not this be all and end all. So lifestyle changes can make a massive difference, just like they can for any phase of life, any gender. There are basic building blocks really that we have forgotten about in modern life because it's not the world we evolved in. So yes, there's lots of evidence to show that diet changes. Most of the evidence says, like it says for all physical and mental health, Mediterranean diet patterns really are what our body wants. And it's also a bit more than that. It's about feeding our microbiome properly. If you've got a healthy, happy microbiome, you're a healthy, happy human. And that's essentially what the Mediterranean diet is probably really achieving. It's achieving a very happy, thriving microbiome, all those billions of bugs that live in us that are actually our friends, and we need to look after them. So diet changes are, bringing in more plant-based foods, a big variety of plant-based foods, nuts, seeds as well, herbs, spices, fish, omega-3, and breaking up with the false friends out there, which is alcohol and sugar and highly processed foods. They're the enemies of us at all ages, really, but they're especially enemies of ours at perimenopause and menopause. And a lot of women say, I just can't eat the stuff I used to eat, or I can't have a glass of wine like I used to. And it's basically your body giving you immediate feedback, finally, saying, I don't like this stuff. And now my ovaries are packing up. I really don't like it. I need you to look after me. So, and there's other more sort of simplistic things, like too much spicy food or too much caffeine can trigger hot flushes. So specific symptoms can get worse. And sleep problems are really common in perimenopause and menopause, because these hormones from our ovaries play a role in our sleep-wake cycle. So we've got to do everything we can to tell our brains when to sleep and tell our brains when to wake up. And alcohol is another enemy of sleep. But so are screens. I'm staring at one right now. We stare at too many screens. Our brains are confused. So I would say as well, a good night's sleep starts first thing in the morning. We should be getting up, getting out, getting the sunlight in. All that sleep hygiene matters in menopause, just like it matters everywhere else. And movement matters in menopause. Our bodies are trying to talk to us. We start losing our muscle in perimenopause and menopause. It's another unwanted gift. And we start gaining fat more easily because there's metabolic changes. So we've got to do our best to fling that on its head. So building muscle, if there's one bit of exercise you want women to get involved with, it's weights and resistance training to get stronger. And that's, if you're going to pick one type of exercise, that's the one. But we still also ideally need to do some sweaty stuff, and we need to do some stretchy stuff. Our bodies do start to get tighter, and that can lead to problems with ligaments and things. So movement is a good idea. Less time in these things that we're always sitting in, that are everywhere. And as with any mental health issue, we live in a very stressful world, a noisy world. And when we get to perimenopause and menopause, women do say, like, I can't multitask like I used to, because brain fog's another big problem. But it's like our brain is just saying, look, please stop asking so much of me and just do one thing at a time. That's okay. You know, we miss our multitasking power because we're quite smug about it, because men are useless at that. But, you know, we're a bit hard on ourselves as well, really. And menopause is a bit of a lesson from our body, maybe saying, look, say no a bit more. It's fine. You don't have to be everywhere for everyone. And learn ways to calm ourselves, because we are on all the time, you know, and that's where breathing techniques, I think, are such a secret weapon. You know, our breath is such a big, powerful tool that can calm so many things down. So breathing techniques, mindfulness, meditation, whatever feels right for you. If it feels too weird, don't do it. You know, find something that you're comfortable to do, because we need this stuff. We need to breathe better. You know, it's getting back to basics, isn't it? So yeah, these lifestyle changes can make a huge difference for women in peri and menopause. So they're worth doing. It's finding the energy and the motivation, though, that's hard, because when you haven't got your hormonal fuel there, sometimes you know what you want to do, you just can't do it. So that can be tricky, but there's no doubt these lifestyle changes can make a massive difference.
Yeah, it's great. And I love that long list of options that people can start doing, even if it's 5 minutes of weights every day or 5 minutes of meditation every day. Just start, and also just be super compassionate to yourself. We live in a world where we're expected to kind of perform as a 20-year-old all the time. And I think menopause is just a way to kind of give yourself permission that you are slowing down and your body is giving you all the signs, and that it's okay that you're not performing like a 20-year-old anymore. So that's super helpful. And obviously Clearhead has some tools on our platform that can help support with some of those, like those breathing exercises. Well, I'd love to transition a little bit in the context of, we talked a lot about the individual going through menopause. How does it show up at work? And, you know, what are the things that workplaces can do to better support those who are going through menopause at work?
And yeah, it does show up at work. You know, we've got to bring our bodies with us everywhere we go. And we've got to acknowledge that at work there are human beings there. You know, we're not machines. You say, you know, there's this almost, we're not 20 anymore, and that's true. But sometimes I think we're almost trying to compete with machines. I mean, we are, aren't we? And we're not machines. We are humans, and we have life events, and we have life phases, and we have good days, we have bad days. But there's something wonderful about humans as well. So it's worth making the effort to keep them happy and healthy, especially in the workplace where we spend so much of our time. It's like our second home. So we can't just turn up at work and suddenly become a robot and then go home and be a human again. We're a human everywhere. So menopause in work is finally becoming a bit more recognised, because what's been going on for decades really is silent suffering, where it's been this stigmatised thing that women have not felt comfortable or able to admit to, like it's some dirty secret. That survey you mentioned that I did, there was a section about how has this impacted you at work, in that, with various questions, and like 84% of women in that said it's actually had a negative effect on me in some way at work. And it varies as to what kind of negative effect, and it will depend on the exact symptoms you've had, how bad they were, and what kind of job you're in. You know, there's different types of workplaces out there with different challenges. was another good survey in New Zealand by the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research, and they teased apart what different types of workplaces are like for women going through menopause symptoms. If you're on your feet all day, or if you're a nurse, or if you're a firefighter, or, you can't work from home. So, there are different challenges for different women. But there is now starting to grow this awakening of, oh my God, these poor women going through this huge life phase, and yet we're all just not talking about it and not making any allowances for it. And a lot of the arguments sort of say, well, we have maternity leave, we have, things in place to acknowledge that massive thing women do and go through. Not all women have babies. All women go through perimenopause and menopause if we live long enough, which fortunately we do, most of us. So it is a universal fact, and some people will struggle with it. Not everybody, but some people will. So acknowledging the impact menopause can have in the workplace is a good idea, just from a humane point of view. But there's also research to show it's costing businesses money by not helping women, because women are leaving. Some of them, a lot of these changes their bodies are going to, especially things like the loss of confidence and the fatigue and the brain fog. They become convinced they can't do their job anymore, and so they leave. Or they don't go as far in their career as they probably would have done. So it's financially sensible as well to notice menopause and try and do something about it in a way that women are going to find helpful. And that's the tricky bit, because, again, everyone's experience is different. So you can't just make a blanket thing either, potentially. But really, at the very basic level, we just need to say the word and have just make that first step to making it not a stigmatized thing, so it becomes more comfortable that it's being acknowledged. And then if workplaces want to go further than that, they can. Bearing in mind, there are lots of women also who don't want to talk about their menopause at work. It's very personal, it's very private for them. So we've got to try and cater for everybody's wants and needs, and know that some people want to make a lot of noise about menopause and some people don't. And some of those people are women who are struggling with it but find it very personal. So it's complicated, like all of these sort of topics are. But yeah, work and menopause are finally being put together, and I think that's a good thing.
And so when you talk about that, for example, you talk about maybe being more anxious, less confident, brain fog affecting our ability to perform or multitask. And let's just say, your manager notices it. You haven't necessarily disclosed that you're going through menopause, but they've noticed a change in how you're working. What is, as you said, what feedback or suggestion can you provide managers that are listening on how to have this conversation in a way that's respectful, and acknowledging that for some people, this is a hugely private thing that they're going through?
It is hard for those managers, isn't it? Especially when it's a topic that they might not feel very comfortable with or confident about. And they may be concerned about saying the wrong thing and just making it worse, putting their foot in it. Or, especially if it's a young male manager, that's the kind of stereotypical thing we say, how does a woman in her 50s talk to a 35-year-old bloke about menopause? How do we get him interested and sympathetic to this life phase? And that's what we really need to do in some way, and we've got to do it in the right way. So it's possible and it's doable. But for managers, who are the front line help for that woman at work, they are actually really important. There's lots of research to show that good manager support makes a big difference to how women cope with their symptoms at work. And because the manager is the person who can actually help you or make some changes if you need changes. So my advice to managers, which I do talks for managers and try and help bring that confidence up for them in a simple way, without trying to turn them into menopause experts. We're not expecting them to have all the answers. Just like when you support a woman who's on maternity leave, you don't have to know how to deliver a baby as the manager, but you need a vague awareness of some of the challenges of pregnancy. It's the same with menopause. But so my advice is, the do's and don'ts is, the main thing you can do is listen and it's the same thing, you know, doctors need to do a lot of the time, is let her tell you what's going on, and give her time to speak. You know, this could be some sort of meeting that she's arranged to talk to you about it, to just listen, try not to interrupt, to be patient, to try and be understanding, even if you don't get everything she's talking about. And the way around that is to start helping everybody get it with more awareness days and things like that. And the don'ts really are to not assume anything. You know, you might have a picture of menopause in your head. That one I said right at the beginning, it's just hot flushes and period stopping, that's about it. You know, so try not to make assumptions. Every woman is different. Try not to, worst thing is do not ridicule, you know, do not make jokes about this. That's the other problem, that menopause and flushes, sometimes the attitude is really quite negative and almost joking about a woman having a hot flush, and you know, that's not really very helpful. We actually know that flushes are bad for us. So we've shown that if you have really severe hot flushes, that increases cardiovascular risk later on. So these unpleasant experiences are more than just getting hot. But yes, managers to listen, to give her time, to try and learn a bit about menopause, so you do broaden your awareness of it. And then she's going to feel more comfortable talking to you, and you're going to feel more comfortable listening, because you really are key to helping her manage her symptoms better, part of that support structure.
And that's the thing, you know, regardless whether it's menopause or, you know, someone going through mental health challenges, such a key lesson or skill set for people, leaders and managers to do is just practice active listening, which is the ability to just listen and not have to interject, not have to give solutions, but just help people feel heard. I mean, are there resources out there, Linda, on how people can do a little bit of learning and upskilling on this type of information about menopause, how menopause shows up at work?
There's things happening. I mean, I'm doing my Menodoctor at Work service now, which is awareness talks for everybody. Then it's manager talks specifically for managers, resources for managers to try and make those meetings a bit easier. So that's kind of what I'm offering at the moment for Kiwi businesses. And there's other companies starting to offer similar things as well. So if you start looking as a workplace or a manager, there will be things out there you can start to tap into. It's early days in New Zealand for this whole menopause in general and menopause at work specifically. So a lot of companies are just sort of figuring it out, finding their feet, considering it. England, as usual, is, you know, ahead of us, ahead of the game. And this has been happening for a while there, with workplaces actually sort of doing concerted efforts, making things happen specifically about menopause, which can be as simple as just an awareness talk where someone comes in and talks to all the staff in a very general sense. And then there can be more specific things like manager talks and manager training or resources. And what we're starting to offer with Menodoctor is also that clinical support through corporates as well, for women who are maybe not getting anywhere with their own health provider or whatever else they've been looking at, and would like that more dedicated menopause clinical support as well. So there are things now out there or coming and growing that will make it easier for managers and workplaces in general to put something into place to get going on this that isn't too complicated or too expensive, but is going to be worthwhile to look after your people who are in this phase so they don't leave you, basically.
You know, one of the jokes is, you know, saying that, like, what about men? Do men get menopause? And, you know, because we do see that some of the psychological impact that you mentioned that women face as they get into their 40s and their 50s, we see that similar change in the men. You know, do men have their version of a menopause?
Yes, we call it andropause. So it is recognized and has a term, and it's, yes, similar in lots of ways. The difference is in the timing of it. as in, how does it happen and how quickly does it happen? So that's what's different between men and women. So when you look at men's testicles, which is basically what we're talking about here, and women's ovaries, those are the things that are changing. Women's ovaries quite dramatically retire around this 50-51 age, and that's menopause. They stagger for a while in perimenopause, but then they really do just say, I'm done. So the egg production is done. The hormone production is pretty much done, although there is a sort of trickle with that and a slight change with testosterone later on for some bizarre reason that we haven't figured out. Whereas what men's version of ovaries do, which is their testicles, is their sperm production, which is their version of eggs. That doesn't, they've got an unlimited sort of sperm production where they just make something afresh every time. We've got a finite number of eggs that will eventually run out, which is what the other way to define menopause is that our limited number of eggs have gone now. So men, from that point of view, they don't have this finite number that they make for their reproductive equipment. And hormones as well with men, their testosterone production doesn't suddenly plummet and when they turn 50-51, but it does decline over time. So there is this steady decline, which is loss of hormones, loss of reproductive hormones, and men can get a lot of very similar symptoms. And men can, a little bubble with I don't know what that is popping up there. They can get those symptoms similar to what women get and can also benefit from their form of HRT. So testosterone replacement is something that is becoming more talked about for men to potentially access as well, that can bring them benefits. But there is that big difference is the timing of it and the dramatic nature of it. And it's all because of how nature designed us, in that women's reproductive system doesn't have an unlimited supply of eggs, whereas men's reproductive system, the sperm, is a different production factory entirely.
Yeah. And I think, as you know, and that's not even talked about as much as menopause. And so there's so much education, and it's obviously very challenging for workplaces to know about all these stages that goes through. So, are there, I guess, other individuals that might be more at risk of a more choppy menopausal period or perimenopausal period? For example, if you struggled with menstrual problems when you're younger, does that mean that you will have a rougher ride? Are there sort of groups of people that should be more mindful that this might be something that's coming and that they should prepare for it?
There is, yes. And if we actually focus first of all on the type of menopause that you go through, because the other big distinction is, did nature cause your menopause or did medicine cause your menopause? And that's an important distinction to talk about as well. So most women go into menopause naturally, but quite a few women don't. And there's two main ways you can go into menopause in a non-natural fashion. One is called surgical menopause, which is when a woman has both her ovaries surgically removed before menopause has happened. And the other term we use is induced menopause, which is when ovaries are damaged by medical treatments, usually things like chemo, radiation, or hormone blockers. So that often they are women who've also been diagnosed with cancer, so they've got that huge challenge to deal with. And then they are thrown into menopause. So surgical and induced menopause is a really often choppy ride, because that is sudden. Your body hasn't really had time to figure out what to do and what's going on. So hormones are there 1 minute and gone the next. And the psychological symptoms are often much more significant for those women as well. But unfortunately, offering these women hormones is not always sort of done quickly enough, or done at all, or done in the right way. So they are definitely an at-risk sort of population, and you can predict their menopause because you know when it's going to happen. And yet, even with all of that, these women are often left feeling very alone and unsupported. So that's an at-risk type of menopause that we should do more about. For women who go through it naturally, yes, there are sometimes things you can look back at, and some of them I've mentioned, which is if other hormonal shifts in your life have been a bit rough, like you've had postnatal depression, postnatal psychosis, or you've had very bad PMS or very bad PMDD, then yes, it might be another vulnerable time for you around peri and menopause, and you and everyone who loves you and your healthcare provider should be aware of that as well. So you know to look out for mood changes or sleep changes or things like that. But there's no guarantee either. So some women who've had PMDD are fine at perimenopause. Some women who've had severe postnatal depression are fine at perimenopause. And then there are other women who didn't even have hard periods. They have had wonderful, easy, painless, light periods all through their life, fine in pregnancy, fine after pregnancy. They hit perimenopause and it's suddenly choppy. So it's difficult to predict what it's going to look like for you. And I think that the best approach is to just be armed with all the knowledge of all the possible versions that are out there and how it might disguise itself, and also all the possible help and supports, things that are good to do. And if you've got all that knowledge, whatever nature throws at you, you're kind of ready for it. The other thing is you can't even look at your mum or your big sister and say, oh, well, her menopause was like this, so that's what mine will be like. It's not that simple either. So there's this mystery around menopause, which is part of the reason why it is hard to pin it down. Although there's a few things that give us an indication that you might have a rougher ride if hormones in the past have thrown you around, but not always.
I guess on a slightly tangential perspective, what about workplaces who are predominantly female and maybe they have a predominantly sort of older female workforce? What are those special considerations those workplaces need to have?
Yeah, well, they really probably do need to equip themselves to make it, a place where menopause is allowed to happen, because it's going to happen, and to make it a friendly place for that to happen, with whatever your humans are, wherever they're at in life, you're there to kind of support whatever that phase tends to look like. So making it, certainly in a workforce like that, menopause should not be stigmatized for a start. It shouldn't be something that women are afraid to admit to or talk about. So getting rid of that stigma is a big must, especially if most of your workforce are going to be facing those challenges, to make it comfortable for women to talk about. And look, women and women are often, a powerful combination. So if you can help put something in place for women to talk to other women, so little, in-house support groups. In England, there's something called the Menopause Cafe, which is done in other countries as well. But it's that idea of a little support group, whether it's online or whether they meet for lunch every now and again, and they just get together and have a good old chat and share stories and tips. And so, workplaces have predominantly got that age and gender there. Something like that would be good to bring in. But yeah, acknowledging menopause as a thing and not making sure nobody's too uncomfortable to talk about it, and certainly, manning up your managers to be confident, comfortable to talk about menopause, considering if most of the people they're managing are probably facing that phase, and they'd be some big things, I think.
Yeah, so I guess to summarize some of the tips that you've shared so far that workplaces can consider, one is obviously get better awareness around what is menopause, destigmatize being able to talk about it, and maybe train your managers on how to be good listeners and be supportive. You talked about potentially considering introducing something like menopause leave, the same way that you have maternity leave. You talked about, being able to have a way of a social connection, whether there's groups of women that, whether at work or outside of work, that want to connect and share what they're going through. You talked about, potentially offering services that allows women to kind of seek clinical support if they're really struggling with that. Is there anything else that we should consider in terms of creating a supportive workplace around this group?
I mean, some workplaces, and more so in England and other countries, but formalised this into a menopause policy. Although I feel like the word policy makes everyone's eyes roll. But sometimes that can be helpful. So as people have got somewhere they can look to that has a detailed description of what menopause is and what supports are available at that workplace if people are having problems, how to approach your manager, some advice on that. So policies can be helpful because they can just give you somewhere to sort of make it, to really sort of crystallize it. But then other people argue, well, that's getting a bit formal and a bit, making it all a bit much. And so some places just have guidelines rather than the word policy, menopause guidelines, some sort of documents or place where people can look for that sort of information, and also to be signposted towards good resources out there, websites and podcasts. I mean, nowadays you Google menopause and you get overloaded. A few years ago it was like crickets. So we've gone from no information to lots of information, which is good and sometimes bad, because then you feel a bit overwhelmed, a bit confused, and there can be contradictory things about the same question. So you can have somewhere guidelines or policy that has, reputable or reliable source of information for women. So that's another thing that some workplaces do. But the danger kind of is if you just do a policy and it just gathers dust in a drawer somewhere. What are you really doing? Where's the sort of tangible changes and support that women are going to actually benefit from? And it will be different for each workplace, just like menopause is different for every woman, and her care package is different, what benefits her and what she wants. Workplaces aren't all the same, and what works for one won't work for the other. So they can pick and choose which things they want to do, which things they don't want to do. And for me, it's best to find out what your people want, and then you'll figure that out, which is another thing we offer at Menodoctor at work, as kind of a survey for your staff to do, to say, what sort of changes do you want? How much noise do you want us to make about menopause? And trying to, gauge it to make sure you're not actually going to kind of push people away in an ironic way. If you get it wrong, or if you make too much noise, people can just start switching off then.
Yeah, and I'd be really keen to hear, like what were the key findings? Because you run one of the largest surveys on menopause. What were the key findings you learned from that survey?
Lots of things. One of the things was how much we are not good at recognizing menopause, women ourselves, but also sometimes our doctors. And it's because it's so sneaky. And it's more the perimenopause phase I'm talking about here, because that is so vague and there's no test for it. That's the biggest problem with perimenopause. There is no test. So 64% of women in the survey that I did, which was answered by just over 4,000 women, 64% of them said, I didn't know it was menopause when I initially started to have these symptoms, or perimenopause. So there's a lot of women being in the dark, worrying they've got something wrong with them. A lot of women worry they're getting dementia, or they've got ADHD, or they've got depression, or, they worry that there's something physically or mentally wrong with them. And that can lead to more anxiety. And it's quite common for women to go through lots of different tests to try and figure out what's wrong with them. And it's true, we have to be careful we're not missing something else, because, you can get palpitations with menopause and perimenopause, but there are other things that can cause palpitations. So we do have to make sure we're not suddenly just going, oh, that's just perimenopause, So that lack of awareness came out the survey. And then the effects at work came out. So 1 in 6 women, they said they'd considered leaving their job because of their symptoms, and 1 in 12 said they actually did. So, and that's similar to what's been found in surveys in other countries. So this is not just a New Zealand thing. This is a biology thing. It doesn't really care where you live or what job you've got or who you vote for. Menopause is very biological, although there are some subtle differences culturally. There are. And that's actually probably related to things like better diets and lifestyles in some countries, and also better attitudes towards aging in some countries, where the older woman is actually respected and seen as a figure of wisdom So that makes a difference. So there's that whole issue of aging and how that is seen in certain cultures comes into menopause as well, because that can make women feel worse because of these negative connotations, when we need to put that positive spin on menopause, because there is one, that this is a second adulthood and a new phase, as well as an old one ending, a new one starting. And it may be rocky, but we get there, and then we're better than we were a lot of the time, and we can reinvent ourselves. Lots of women start something new in their 40s or 50s. I did, started a business, so there's that energy. Weirdly, it's a fertile time. It can be your most fertile time in other ways, even though that biological fertility's ended, some other fertility starts. So we need to try and not be too doom and gloom about it either, but we must acknowledge how difficult it can be for some people. So women are armed and ready in case it's difficult for them, and getting support if it's difficult for them.
To end, I guess, we ask all our guests this one question, which is, what is your one wellbeing practice, Linda?
You know what it is at the moment? It's stroking my new doggy. So we got a puppy at Christmas, and he's just wonderful. And, animals, pets, the power of those little things in our lives. You feel, the adrenaline and the cortisol just going down. So he is my little moment these days. He does have this magical power to make me feel less stressed, whatever's going on. So he's my little secret weapon. Bronx is my secret weapon at the moment. My little French bulldog is great therapy.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this, Linda. We've really gone down the rabbit hole with menopause, and we hope that our audience get to understand a little bit more about all of this and demystify it a little bit more. That's it for today's episode. If you want to learn more about how Clearhead can support your workplace, or you have a burning mental health question that you'd like us to explore on the podcast, check us out at myclearhead.com and drop us a message. Love our content? Share it with a friend, or leave us a comment on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. Thank you so much again for listening, and catch you on the next one.